Call the meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Lowell City Council Public Safety Subcommittee, another in a series of meetings suggested to us, topics which were suggested by the citywide neighborhood group. These are two of the items remaining on the list. There are still a few others we will meet in subsequent months, but tonight we thought we'd talk about certain ordinances and building codes and laws related to residential dwellings. So get right to it. If members of the subcommittee have any comments in the beginning.
Give me a roll call, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Roll call, please. Yep.
Chairman Martin.
Here.
Councilor Elliott.
Here.
Councilor Nguyen.
Here.
3 present.
Okay. Mr. Manager, I don't know if you have anything to offer initially. If we could, if not, we'll just, I know I have a few questions for the solicitor, but.
Sure. Well, I just, by way of introduction, we have here tonight the city solicitor to address questions that were on the agenda related to the law department, discussing options available to landlords and removing tenants charged and convicted of drug-related crimes, sort of explore that as a possibility, whether that's there's anything that can be done along those lines. Questions raised as to who represents cities in court cases related to ordinance violations and creating protocol for the city to respond to illegal activities and properties throughout the city. And I think a lot of this crosses over into, outside necessarily the solicitor's office, but to into the inspectional services. And for that, we have Eric Slagle, who is the Deputy Director within Planning and Development for Inspectional Services, and also our Senior Health Inspector, Dave Willett. And along those lines, we also anticipate talking tonight about the, as you've already pointed out, health codes specifically related to single and multifamily dwellings. We have the, and we also have Adam Bakey, the Assistant City Manager for Planning and Development here as well.
Okay. Maybe just as an initial, I guess, jurisdictional thing, how these things are handled in your office. I mean, we have like a state sanitary code, which is sometimes called the health code, which sometimes then people would think is the health department, which really, I think has another real charge, the Board of Health anyway. So maybe you could talk about, or somebody who deals with sanitary code violations that, or complaints that come in.
Right. The state sanitary code is enforced by the sanitary code inspectors who are housed at development services. They also act as the agents for the Board of Health. They formerly resided in the health department, but in the reorganization that happened a few years ago, they were brought in with the building inspectors into development services. So
when I go into a residential apartment, for example, a building inspector, can look at the structure. You get a plumbing inspector about, water pressure, electrical capacity. Those are kind of defined. We typically building trades and building codes and deal with permits. But when we have an existing structure with violations, I suppose there could be those issues too. But I would think primarily we're dealing with what types of violations in the sanitary code?
Well, the sanitary code violations generally come down to habitability. There's a lot of crossover between the building code and the sanitary code, requirements for smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. The sanitary code also deals with things like water temperature, availability of heat, the security of the building, whether or not the windows are secure, the doors are secure. There are requirements in the health code, the sanitary code. For each one of those items, those are enforced by the health code inspectors. They also enforce things, vermin, that's those sort of things like infestations. The most common things like bed bugs or cockroaches, mice, that sort of stuff comes in. Dave, can you think of any other kind of general issues that fall under the sanitary code?
Yes, most of it too is we check the egresses to make sure that the tenants can get in and out. A lot of times they block it themselves. One of the other things, we work very closely with the fire department when we do go in, that if we find, a lot of times we find decks that are unsecured to the building, the stairs going to them aren't safe, the handrails could fall off. So in case of an emergency, if a fireman was running up in the dark of a night to try to rescue somebody, we usually try to find that problem before they do. We also check to make sure that all they have no key-to-key locks on them, so that way too, in case of a fire, if the tenant needs to get out, they don't have to go searching for a key to leave the house. It's always one of those thumb things on the deadbolt parts. We check lighting and outlets, make sure the ventilations in the bathrooms are fine, to make sure that there's no mold growth or mildew growth in those. Again, with the smoke detection and the CO alarms, to make sure they're in the proper place, make sure that they are installed. A lot of times the children take them out, they are installed, but the batteries in them are the same ones in all the remotes. So usually when we get there, the batteries are going out of most of the cabins. So we check those all the time. Pretty much all the other stuff like that, the shared facilities. The other thing we're finding a lot is that a lot of the spots, except around the college area, they're using them as rooming houses. We've been finding a lot of rooming houses as we do our residential inspections. As we go in, we see separate locks on each bedroom door. So those are all illegal units that we've uncovered quite a few of those with this new residential clause inspection also.
All right, so I was going to so you're an inspector, right?
Correct.
So part of what you do is the inspections related to the new ordinance.
That's one part
And
of
I
the
was going
job,
to say,
yes.
so what's your typical day? Or if you have one?
Well, in that department, we handle all the phone calls for, let's say, any trash. So if things are left on the sidewalk, if things were illegally dumped in the woods, if things are dumped at the schools, or whatever, that's one part of it. We also handle all the restaurants to make sure they get inspected twice a year. So we get any calls on a restaurant or any violations with a restaurant, we do those. We check every ice cream truck in the city. We check every storage truck in the city to make sure that those pass. I get a lot of calls, like they were saying, on the bed bugs issue. That's one of our main ones. It is actually nonstop. Yeah, never caught up on the paperwork, never caught up. It's always calls coming in.
So you have a scheduled inspections every week, but you also deal with complaints, is that?
Correct. As the people call in, they call in the main office over there. It goes to one of the clerks. The clerks take it and they assign it to myself. I'm the senior inspector over there, so from there, then I have to delegate to which inspector it goes to by their areas or whatever. And so as fast as we're sending them out, when we leave in the morning, so when they come in the afternoon, we'll go to the day before. When they come in that evening, that morning they're at my desk, and then it says whether the inspector needs to be there that morning or that afternoon. So it's set when one of the clerks get it, they would ask the tenant, would you like that inspection first thing in the morning, which is 10 to 12, or in the afternoon, 2 to 4? And then they would enter it in the computer. When I get there in the morning, I'd say it's Centerville, so it would go to this inspector, Pawtuckaville would go to this one, and wherever it goes. And they have to take care of those that day. And then result them in the computer, whether they set the violation, whether they solved the problem, whether it was unfounded. And also, if it's in their area, they get the trash. Each inspector also has their regular route of restaurants and everything that they do.
Okay.
It's well-rounded.
Okay. Do you have enough to do?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Mr. Manager? Yeah.
If I could, one of the questions raised hit upon the reorganization. I think that this is one area where the reorganization has been particularly effective, that they share the same space, they participate in the same departmental meetings instead of being two separate units. So there's quite a bit of overlap and cooperation and improved communication that has resulted from the reorganization. A number of other things as well, but that's certainly one area that has improved. For example, we had a property recently, we received some complaints from some tenants that I know that the health inspectors were out, they saw some things, they reported them back to the building inspector went out, and violation notices were sent out that otherwise may not have occurred. So that type of level of cooperation has improved dramatically.
Councilor Noon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The level of collaborations between the health inspector and building inspector, this has been gone on for how long?
The reorganization went into place in 2010, I believe it was.
Yes.
And so it's been, I mean, obviously there was some communication that went on before that, but most people that have been involved in this would certainly support the notion that it's improved dramatically since the reorganization, so over the last 3 years,
So
collaboration.
in dealing with a complaint, is it often that you go in with the health inspector, the building inspector go in with the health inspector, and how often does that happen?
That happens a lot. We try to triage the complaints based on the reports that we get from either the tenants or the landlords, whoever's calling in, to make a determination as to whether or not it requires a health inspector or a building inspector or both. And if there's an appearance as though it's going to require a joint inspection, we do a joint inspection. In addition, as David mentioned, we also reach out to the fire department if it appears as though the issues that are being raised raise fire safety issues. We have a very good working relationship. Robert Marsali, who's the building commissioner, has worked really hard to build good cooperation between our department and the fire department. We do a lot of joint inspections and basically 3-person inspections with a health inspector, a building inspector, and a fire inspector when those issues come up.
Does the building inspector tend to have more work than the health inspector? Because according to Dave, the building inspector do enforcing new ordinance, but also dealing with complaint as well. What beside dealing with complaint the health inspector do?
The health inspectors? Yeah. The health inspectors have a kind of a wide array of things I think Dave mentioned. We have to do the dumpster inspections. They deal with the dumpsters. They deal with all the restaurants. Every festival that happens in the city has initial involvement from the health inspectors, and then health inspectors are actually there during the time of the festival. So the health inspectors have kind of a broad array, and they have to do both the rental inspections, which are every 3 years now, the rental inspections, scheduled inspections, and complaint inspections resulting from either tenants or neighbors who are calling to complain for violations. The building inspectors, on the other hand, have a large portion of their responsibility is inspections resulting from building permit applications. So every time somebody gets a deck put on or does a remodel or new construction in the city, the building inspectors who are assigned to that area are assigned to do each one of those inspections. And often individual projects require multiple inspections. Inspections for foundations, inspections for rough inspections for the initial stud work, final inspections, and that's only if everything goes right. So if there's a problem, that requires multiple kind of follow-up inspections to make sure that the problem was remedied by the contractor on site. So they have all that work in addition to all of the complaints that come in for building department, building code issues, which as Councilor Martin had mentioned, were structural issues about the building, work done without a permit, all of those that they get reported, or as is most likely the case, that they find proactively. We have a very active, proactive program where our building inspectors and our health inspectors as well, but primarily the building inspectors, are instructed to kind of keep their eye out for signs of work being done at properties without permits being issued. Our inspectors, both the health inspectors and the building inspectors, are assigned to specific areas of the city, so they are familiar with the permits that have been issued in those areas, as well as kind of the potential problem sites. They've done a very good job of noticing when there's signs of construction, and they know that these buildings haven't pulled permits, so that's another big part of their job as well.
Do you see a possibility of cross-training between the health inspectors and the building inspector?
Well, at the current time, the kind of the level of cooperation that we have is placing the health inspectors with information so that they can spot potential building code issues, not that they can diagnose them. One of the issues about being a building inspector is the requirement for multiple certifications to do building work. And you often have to have a background in construction in order to be able to do the kind of specific diagnosis. That being said, our health inspectors are trained, and our policy is that if they observe a situation at a location where they've been called for a health inspection that appears to bring up a building code issue, they are immediately on the phone to the local building inspector. One of the great things about the way the department is set up is these are people that they know. There's the person in the cubicle next to them. So there's a lot of comfort with reaching out to a building inspector to have that inspector come on site. And it happens on a regular basis that they do that.
I like the way the manager implemented the bringing the both inspectors together to health and building in that way is more easier for citizens to make one phone call rather than make 2 or 3 phone calls to different inspectional service. So, thank you.
Councilor Mercier?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the panel over here. The first question was, what are the landlord's options to remove tenants from drug crimes? For example, there had been a time when I got a call from kind of hysterical landlords saying, I don't live in the apartment building that I own, but I'm receiving calls that one of the tenants is dealing drugs, and I almost believe it. I can almost prove that it's true. What do I do with this call? What happens then? What option is available from the city to help this landlord? You know that if in time the police come and seize things, the landlord could be almost responsible and lose his building because he could be a part of that, which this person wasn't. So what options are available? This is the very first question. I think it's a good one. What are we as neighborhood group leaders thinking should happen, or they might get calls too? So what do we do in a case like this?
I mean, I think the first thing that I would suggest anyone do along those lines is contact the police and let the police investigate that. If someone simply convicted of a drug offense, or obviously if they're arrested, they'll be removed from the premises over a short period of time, I would anticipate. If they're convicted of that, you can't prevent them from living there, but the best bet is really to contact the police department, because I mean, we could send in the inspectors, but unless there are code violations, there's nothing we can do. And also, if it's a code violation issue, it doesn't necessarily fall on the tenant who might be selling drugs. It falls on the landlord. So, which obviously we'd like those code violations fixed, but it would be the person who would be reporting that to us. I have a couple of attorneys here to my right, and perhaps they have an opinion as to that's different or can add to that.
I would concur. These are really private rights of action that typically we are not in the process or in the position to be advising landlords in terms of legal recourse that they can take with their tenants. That being said, the key, though, is working cooperatively with the police department. And that certainly has happened in years past. There has been a lot of productive cases where the police department, working in close conjunction with landlords and others in the neighborhood, apart from landlords, have then been able to take action on drug-related activity.
Thank you.
There's also, if I could just add, Counselor, typically when you're trying to move a tenant out, if they haven't paid their rent, you have to give them 14 days notice. If there's no other real reason, it's 30 days notice. But in drug crime situations, sometimes you can get away with 72-hour notice. But again, as the solicitor said, that's a private action between the landlord and the court. The city really doesn't have a role to play except for the police department confirming the drug crime.
And if you might, I have one more question
Sure.
and concern, because these are typically things that happen when people call me. I know that we have rules and laws in the books whereby you can't keep an unregistered vehicle on your property because 1 leads to 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then it becomes a junkyard. I understand that. How do we, as city councilors, use discretion with the law in terms of being a little bit lenient with a scenario such as this? The young daughter goes off to college, loves her car, knows she's going to be running out with her insurance on it, it won't be registered, but she doesn't want to get rid of the car, and the parents don't have a garage to take it out of sight. There's one scenario. The second one is a young man is going off to the service. He's got his vehicle in the yard. He wants to come home and still have that vehicle. He also doesn't have a garage to put it in. What are we going to do? Tell the parents you get 30 days to get rid of that car, sell it, get it out of there? Where do we go with this scenario?
Well, those are the kind of issues that our zoning enforcement officer deals with every day. Part of the challenge is that for every time we get a report of an unregistered vehicle in the city, every single person who has an unregistered vehicle has a story about why it's unregistered. And every single one of them can be, in their own way, a compelling reason why they want to have an unregistered vehicle there. The challenge that we have is unless somebody personally knows this individual, there's no way to confirm that it's an accurate story. And B, we really are not in the business of having that sort of discretion. So we recommend to the individual, there are storage spaces you can rent to place the vehicle. If you have a garage on your property, I know lots of people in the city don't, but if you do, that you use for another purpose, you can place the vehicle in there. Other than that, I think it's incumbent upon the owners of the vehicle to provide appropriate storage for it. And if that's off-site storage, there's, lots of storage places have ground level garages that are stored. If it's inside a structure, it's not in violation of the ordinance.
And what if it's covered?
Covered doesn't count as inside a structure, so an unregistered vehicle that's covered is still in violation if it's unregistered.
So if you have an antique car that you just register in the summer because you don't drive it in the winter, or you have a summer car that's, you don't drive it because it wouldn't make it in the, so you can't have that on your property either.
You can't have, the way that the ordinance is written, you can't have an unregistered vehicle on your property if it's not within a structure. I would suggest if you got a summer vehicle, you put it in a garage. I know that it's challenging because the stories that we hear are stories from individuals with compelling reasons. But I can honestly say that the zoning enforcement officer who deals with multiple claims of unregistered vehicles every single week has one of those stories for every single person in the city. I think it's best to not have the gray area, to not have somebody have discretion to say, oh.
Counselor, it's interesting. When you listed off all of those examples, we actually had it was actually, I think, before Eric came down to the office there, but we had some discussions about perhaps coming to the council with some proposals of modifications to that, because we do hear those, and those are the exact. Every single one of your examples were what we talked about. The person who has someone that goes off to college, the person who has someone going to the military, the person who has even a situation where someone might have an antique car that they, like to, work on occasionally. But you do get into this sort of slippery slope, and as we started to explore it and work on it, we kept on running into those slippery slopes, and we kind of pulled back. And we should probably go back. I personally think we should probably go back and revisit it, but it is going to get into some territory there that it may not be accepted by everyone. I know that other communities do it differently. They allow one car. They allow it to be covered.
Right.
Something like that.
That's right.
And it may be, too, that we have to put some other restrictions on beyond that, because certainly there are some neighborhoods of the city that just can't accommodate all of these cars.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd be happy to sort of explore
that
that
would
and
be
report
good.
back.
And honest to God, I just have one last thing, because I'm getting these calls like this. When are landlords responsible to turn on the heat? Is it in September? That provide the heat?
You have to have heat available from September 15th to, is it? Yeah,
To April?
To April, yeah, to April 15th.
April 15th.
And we get a lot of those calls in April
That
about,
they're too hot.
well, about people who want, but because a lot of the units in the city have single source heat and air conditioning.
That's right.
So we get a lot of calls in early April or late March, if it's an exceptionally warm year, about people complaining that the heat is still on and they're not turning on the air
get them.
conditioner.
I
But
get
by
them.
law, you have to have heat available until April
Okay,
15th.
thank
So
you.
that's the,
And I would point out that applies to residential buildings. It
Yes.
doesn't apply to City Hall.
doesn't apply to City Hall.
Okay. I'd like to open it up to questions from the public, but before, just one last thing is about city representation in court. Maybe the solicitor could address that. What do we do, and also what's our protocol to respond when we're made aware of an illegal activity?
When the health code, the health inspectors proceed with a complaint that is unresolved, or the building commissioner proceeds with a complaint that's unresolved, either the building commissioner, Robert Marsilia, or one of the health inspectors, Don Murphy, they are the members of our staff who prosecute those complaints that we believe deserve to go to housing court. That's part of their responsibilities in the department. The housing court session sits on Mondays in Lowell Superior Court. It's the Northeast Housing Court. Both Robert and Don have been doing this for quite a while. There is not an attorney who goes and represents the city at those hearings, and there hasn't. I mean, there has traditionally not been an attorney representing those, and that's I think a valid choice. The building commissioner has actually been very successful in housing court, and Don Murphy has also been very successful in housing court, getting the housing court judges to act on those complaints. That's kind of how we've done it thus far.
In addition to that, there are cases, say, with zoning violations, and it's at that point that a member of the law department would be involved in cases of that nature, as well as enforcement actions perhaps brought by the fire department, either nature of alarms or unpaid fees and charges and things of that accord. And as Mr. Slagle had mentioned, this has been in place for as long as I can remember, and it seems to work well.
Okay. And then the last question about the responding to illegal activities, it strikes me that one of the examples that was pretty newsworthy was the incident at Fortunato's. That was not a residence, but there was allegations of a crime on a Saturday night, and Monday morning code people are in doing inspections. I assume we don't do that in every case, but are there cases where we do that? What's our, if we get calls about illegal activity, how does your department respond to that?
A lot of it depends on the nature of the call. The way our department is currently set up, we have contact information that is on file with the dispatch for both the fire department and the police department. The vast majority of the calls that we receive during off hours are not criminal related. They're fire department calls, either because of extensive structural damage to a building resulting in a fire, or something like a vehicle crashing into a building. Those are the two most common issues that kind of spur call off hour calls. With respect to criminal activity, we don't generally get off-hour calls for criminal activity. We do, however, occasionally get the police department is very good about reporting to the building commissioner if during the course of a criminal investigation they come across issues that they believe rise to the level of code violations. Not surprisingly, I think the police department has a lot of other priorities when they're on site at a criminal investigation. But I do know that there have been times in the past when the police department will reach out to the building commissioner. Those things rarely are emergency things for purposes of the code.
I didn't mean to suggest they're all off hours, but police notice something, that's the process. They call the building commissioner. Mr. Manager?
If I may, that's correct. They also, in the specific case of the Fortunatos incident, I received a report from the police regarding the incident that occurred there, and had concerns regarding health and building codes, and that's what prompted the meeting we had that morning, and then my directing them to go into that property. So in those cases, the police will alert me to something as well, and then I will contact the inspection people.
We have, Councilor Elliott?
If I could just follow up on that. So how many referrals, if you will, do you get from the police department? Because I think that's a good point. When they go into these apartments to answer a call, I'm going to presume more often than not there are code violations, and I agree they have other priorities to worry about, filling out reports, following up on criminal charges, going to court. But it is a good opportunity for your department to find out or to access information regarding violations. So how many cases, how many times have you got reports from the police?
I don't have specific numbers. All I have is kind of my anecdotal knowledge, and I know it's happened probably 10 to 12 times so far this calendar year. As I said, the kind of much more frequent time that happens is when the fire department's there. They are naturally looking at the kind of health and safety issues, whereas I think the police department, I'm not a police officer, but I can imagine.
No, that's not what they're hired to do.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if I'm going into an apartment for whatever reason, I'm not thinking, oh, well, there's a code violation here. But would make some sense. I guess the logistical nature of that would be very much a challenge.
If I could, Councilor, I think that's a great point you brought up, though, the coordination between the police department or fire department and inspectional services, development services. One thing that we do is the same geographic districts tie in with the police department, so that the police that are responsible for one section of the city tie in with the inspectional people for both building and health. The other is that we do have members of the development services that sit in the ComStat meetings, and so there's a crossover of communication there. If there's problems at a particular property, they can respond to that. So that type of coordination does take place. So those may not actually be referrals, but there'll be follow-up that come out of those ComStat meetings that the development services staff will follow up on. And then there's also the problem property task force that we have that's cross-departmental, that again, there's that sharing of information that goes on regarding specific high-priority properties. So I think it's a good question that you raise, and I think we're, again, made an emphasis on that as a result of the reorganization.
And that's all good, and it's good to communicate, but it's how do we get the numbers up? But I just want to follow up on something earlier. How many units have we inspected so far underneath this new ordinance that we adopted?
Thus far, we have completed inspections on just about 2,300 units in the city. I don't want to belabor kind of things that we've gone over before. We did divide the city up into thirds,
Right.
so that there's 1/3 of the city received
Yep.
proactive requests for applications. There's still a little over 200 active applications that have not received their inspections yet, and that's mostly a kind of coordination with the landlords. There's a lot of landlords who are out of town during the summer, so it becomes harder to coordinate.
So you have to coordinate a time frame to meet these landlords to go through the inspections. So how many inspectors do we have doing these inspections?
I think of the five, we have 5 health inspectors and 1 senior inspector.
Okay.
And right now, we have an open position that we're filling. So there's not a person, we're filling a position of a health inspector. But there are 4 people who are actively doing these inspections at this time.
And how many violations have you found in the 2,300 that you've?
Right. Thus far, we have failed 112 different times. And those, it's important to know that what that failure means is something on the checklist that the health inspector has spurred a failure. That could be something as simple as David mentioned, you walk in and the smoke detector doesn't have batteries, a 5-minute fix.
Yep.
It could be something as serious as has happened, leaking heating and gas oil in the basement of a building and the heat not being on that requires a complete shutdown of the building. So the 112 failures fall in the spectrum from the extreme of kind of massive problems that require a building shutdown to the relatively simple of a broken window or a window that lacks a screen that is also considered a violation, but would be a relatively easy fix for a landlord or owner.
So then you got to go back after you fail them, and check out the improvements, and hopefully they've been made.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Questions or comments from members of the public? Anyone?
Kathleen Marson, 200 Market Street. I have some jurisdictional questions. Most of the residences in my neighborhood are condominiums, so I'm trying to determine like minimum maintenance. Obviously, there are condo rules. If you don't follow the condo rules, there's some things that we can do. But in an extreme situation, is there a place for the city to get involved in an own residential unit like that?
Condominium units are subject to the sanitary code just the same as rental units. If they are owner occupied, they do not fall under the rental unit permitting. But we get complaints for condominium units all the time. Generally, if there's not a landlord-tenant relationship, those complaints, it doesn't, if a person is living in a house and the water temperature isn't high enough, they're not going to call us to tell us that. Whereas a tenant who's living in a house and the water temperature isn't high enough because the landlord's not setting it up right, we get calls for that. So owner-occupied properties don't generate the same volume of calls.
I think mostly I'm talking about unoccupied, mostly bank-owned properties, and that's really where we're having a problem with, just that really high number of bank-owned properties or vacant properties that are still in the foreclosure process.
We absolutely deal with those. That's what.
So, and I happened to stumble upon one the other day that when we went inside, someone must have been in there. They left the door open, and we found it was in really extreme condition. So we didn't know. Can we call the building?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. That actually it kind of deals with 2 separate functions of our department. The vacant and foreclosed, we have an ordinance in the city that requires the registration and maintenance of vacant and foreclosed properties. So the banks are required to register with the city if they have a vacant and foreclosed property. So we have that under the Division of Development Services. And if it's occupied, there are sanitary code issues about occupied units that even if they're bank owned or
Okay, and what's the time frame? Say, there's really some leaking situation going on. So obviously the condo association is going to, take care of it and try to bill whoever owns it, the unknown person. But I guess where we're trying to find out is there any assistance that the city can give us in that process to try to identify who owns the property at that moment in time to try to get the situation resolved?
One of the things that we do for bank-owned or vacant and foreclosed properties is we maintain, they're in a database that we have So if the property has been registered with the city, it takes 5 minutes to check to see what the most recent registration is. They're required to not only register the name of the bank that owns it, but they're required to provide the property manager or maintenance company and contact information. So properties that are registered with the city have to provide that to us. So we would have that on file. If they haven't registered with the city, we obviously won't have that information. But if it is vacant, we have staff that part of their jobs is to if a property is reported as vacant foreclosed, we'll track it down at the registry. We'll do our best to try to find out who the current owner is, whether it's a financial institution or a property owner, and try to obtain compliance with both the vacant foreclosed ordinance, which requires the registration and the maintenance, and the sanitary code if it's occupied at the time.
And then my other question is really about timeframes, and probably to Ms. O'Connor, is at what point, at what length of time does the city become compelled to fix a problem? I mean, we have a building that has windows occasionally falling out with glass crashing to the ground, and it's been going on for 5 years. And it's in court. It's there's all kinds of legal things going on. But at what point do you say, "Darn, I wish I could walk down there, but I can't because the glass might crash down on my head"? So I just wonder how long how long do you let the process go on before someone steps in and says, "Hey, we're going to take that glass out, board the window up, do something so that it's not going to harm people"?
Well, in the policy within development services is based on public health and safety. So generally, because quite frankly, it's not in the taxpayer's best interest. The development services doesn't jump to the "we're going to fix it" step first. I think that everybody understands that's not a realistic response. So the building commissioner, our first multiple steps are to obtain compliance from the property owner. So if we attempt to do that through issuing violation notices, we have the opportunity to fine property owners, we have the opportunity to, as a next step, take them to housing court, which is, we spoke about earlier, is something that the health inspector and the building commissioner do on a regular basis, where the housing court judge will tell them that they have to fix this. In very rare cases, that doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, the building commissioner, who's the senior code enforcement officer for the city, has to make the determination about whether there's a significant enough impact on public health and safety that we're going to expend taxpayer funds to fix the problem and attempt to recoup that later through a lien or some sort of legal action. And that's on a case-by-case basis by the building commissioner, and he makes the determination as to whether or not something rises to the level of being a danger to the public.
And that's the final say on it.
That's where
That's the person who has the ultimate responsibility for whether or not they fix that.
the building commissioner is if it's a code violation, the building commissioner is the individual who has the final
Okay.
say on code violation.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Anne Marie Page, and we thank you very much for holding these public safety subcommittees. And in our neighborhood, next to the word lights, our next favorite word is enforcement. And we want to thank you all because this reorganization is working. When we first sat down with Mr. Lynch and said, "This isn't working," he said, "Well, then we'll make some changes and get it to work." And he did, and it is. We're not perfect, but we're a lot better than we were. And with this little magic email, we can get a hold of Mr. Slagle real quick and just tell him what our problem is, and he gets it solved. And again, as you have all mentioned, we see a little more teamwork, which is what we really need. And on the teamwork, as I've said, I drive around my neighborhood and other neighborhoods, I see things, and always writing down little notes. And I'm hoping that when the police department, cruisers, or even other city workers or inspectors are driving around and they see things like 4 mattresses leaning up against a building, that they're going to call in and say, you know what? You got 4 mattresses leaning against a building. If somebody drops a cigarette, we have a problem. 2 weeks ago, we had 4 pieces of equipment up on the other end of my street. My God, we figured a house must be coming down, right? Somebody in the backyard thought rather than put the mattresses out or call to have them picked up, they would just set them on fire. So, you know, you have to use a little common sense. But your reorganization is working. We say thank you. For the Safety Subcommittee, we say thank you. I thank you to Councilor Mercia because my question was the same. If you're a landlord and you think there's drugs going on in that building, what do? And my first call would be to the police. Then let the police call in the other inspectional services. There's more than one way to skin a cat. I thank you very much. Appreciate what you do.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from members of the public or other members of the council? All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn and we'll take this up the second Tuesday next month.
So move.
Motion to adjourn by Councilor Noon, second by Councilor Elliott. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. We stand adjourned.